And our urban squeezers, of course, Associate Professor Jason Byrne, Dr Tony Matthews, urban planners with the School of Environment at Griffith University. Gentlemen, hello.
Hey Matt, how are you doing?
Matt?
I think we ought to begin with the hot topic of the moment. Is the Gold Coast a metropolitan area, or is it a region, or is it a city? Which one of these?
Tony, how about you go first today?
Thanks, Jason.
You didn't have the opportunity to see the hot potato get tossed.
The hospital hand pass.
My hands are on fire here. According to the Australian Bureau of Statistics, the Gold Coast city is a city by virtue of its population.
Okay, so there's a population delineation, if you like.
There is. There is.
What is it?
Somewhere around 30 or 40,000.
So it's quite low.
It's quite low. So Gold Coast City has multiples of that. So it is most definitely by population terms a city. Absolutely.
According to the ABS.
According to the ABS.
Okay.
Some other definitions would look at the kind of function of the area that you're calling a city. Does it have any Fortune 500 companies, for example? The Gold Coast doesn't.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't count as a city in that sense. Does it have any culture? Well, we've got a cultural centre, but do we have opera, high arts, that kind of stuff?
Occasionally.
No,
Occasionally.
Yeah, a little bit like, but not like Melbourne, right?
Uh-huh.
Does it have galleries? Does it have museums?
So all these things get factored in depending.
Depending.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
they do, and they're interpretive. But it's hard to argue with the population. If you define a city by population, at least that gives you something static to work with.
Just about everything's a city then.
Well, that's the thing. Yeah, I mean, this is a country of cities.
Cities all over. I'm confused. I'm scratching my head. I don't know. But when it gets down to things like statutory definition and who gets allocated what resources as a result of that definition, it obviously becomes relevant. And that's been some of the discussion in and around the M1 in recent times, is this stretch of road from, down there to the south and up towards Brisbane, is it an urban road or is it a regional stretch of road? On goes the debate.
Well, Peter Spirit has suggested that the Gold Coast area is in fact a 200-kilometre long city that starts up around the Sunshine Coast and extends all the way down through across the border into Tweed. So in that sense, in planning, we would call it a conurbation.
That's a conurbation?
Right. So that's where previous urban areas begin to grow into each other. For example, you've got the Boston, Washington, New York conurbation in the United States, one large urban area. Southern California is another example where it goes from San Diego all the way up to Santa Barbara, encapsulating Los Angeles. Now, that has a larger population than all of Australia in that one conurbation. In there's infrastructure that's obviously shared across municipal boundaries. You would think that that would make it important regional metropolitan infrastructure and is critical for city building. So transport infrastructure is a big aspect of city building, right, Tony?
Oh, for sure. It definitely is. And this is the thing, when you're dealing with a long conurbation, let's just keep the attention on the local context for the time being. So let's take Noosa as the northern point of southeast Queensland and the border with New South Wales, or Tweed if you want to go across the border as the southern or end point.
Yeah.
That's the 200 case that Peter Spirit is talking about that Jason just mentioned. But what you have in there is several different local councils. And so in order for them to strategically plan together to provide things like transport infrastructure, you need to zoom out a little bit in terms of your strategic scale of engagement. So that's why we tend to have regional plans in southeast Queensland, because they provide a strategic framework that crosses over each of the local council's administrative areas, but gives them the power and the strategic vision to be able to provide different types of infrastructure that sync with each other and provide for overall regional aims, agendas and advantages. So that's why we do regional planning here.
This concept of a non-urban road, that's what the M1 has been defined as today. That's what we've been hearing about today. Metropolitan roads and non-urban roads. Why would there be points of difference? Do you know the answer to that question?
It's kind of a peculiar definition that you would
non-urban.
have such a significant
It's clearly
road.
urban.
It's clearly urban. It's a highway. It's performing urban functions, carries very large numbers of traffic. The kinds of traffic that's on it is critical for the growth and maintenance of an urban region.
And it's flanked on each side by either houses or commercial activity. It's not like you're driving...
very little gap.
It's looking pretty urban.
It's not like when you drive out west and you're surrounded by countryside. This is
tumbleweeds.
It's incredibly urban. I can't see why anyone would suggest that it's not.
Anyway.
So some of it gets back to the kind of political definition like we were talking about before. So in the old days of Australia, as it was becoming a federation, we had issues with different gauge railways stopping at the border, right, and having to hop off a train and then hop off on another train because you couldn't coordinate. That's why we have this regional planning. Certainly the highway is spanning across multiple local authorities and providing benefits to those local authorities as well as disadvantages like congestion and pollution. And so we need to think about who pays for those benefits. That's why we have a state to coordinate those things, right? Not local government doing it.
Well, then there's the federal component too when it comes to who pays for which portion of what.
Right.
Transport. Yes, you just mentioned congestion and pollution and the like. We kind of got sidetracked there for a moment talking about this metropolitan regional thing that has been a topic of some interest to callers across the course of the afternoon. But what you wanted to talk about today was the future of transport more broadly. A lot of discussion lately about driverless cars. So you plug in your destination and you jump in and you read the paper or whatever, I suppose, while you're on your way there. How realistic is this?
Well, it sounds like science fiction, right? But they already exist. Tesla's got them right now.
Yeah.
That technology is there. There was a death recently where the Tesla vehicle went underneath a truck that had turned in front of it. And that's the first out of many we were talking about.
Yeah, we were talking about this earlier. So between Tesla, Google, Toyota, BMW, Apple, driverless cars have done millions of kilometres of driving now in test situations and in live testing situations, not on closed tracks, but actually out there on streets. And there's been one fatality that I'm aware of.
And here it was due to the design of the car, which is quite low to the ground, and the truck quite high, and it didn't have beneath the truck any kind of obstacle that the car could automatically detect, that the sensors would detect and stop the car.
Right.
There's been many other cases, in fact, where pedestrians have stepped in front of these Teslas and the car has responded before the driver's even able to think about, oh my God, I need to stop. And the car has braked and the pedestrian has survived. So those technologies already exist. They're there, they're on the road, and they're in use. We're going to see them increasingly, I think.
What's the rollout time for this? I mean, it seems like such an incredible leap of faith into the hands of technology, but are we talking a matter of years before these things?
Yeah, we're probably talking 10 to 15 years before they start to become pretty commonplace. Now, we've a lot to do in the meantime around setting up legal frameworks and things like that to actually manage and license these
Can
vehicles.
you imagine the bureaucracy? I just gave myself a headache.
And ethical frameworks too, right? So at the moment you have these regular problems where some turkey drives in front of the tram and causes a big backup, right? Or some cyclist recently rode in front of the tram. There was an accident. Well, what happens if you're in a driverless vehicle, you're working on your laptop, you're happily there, an accident is detected by the vehicle, and the choice is to either run over the two old ladies at the side of the road or take out 5 school children. You know, the car will make that decision for you, that ethical decision.
Ooh.
And in rational terms, the car is going to decide that the easiest thing to do is kill you by driving itself and you into a wall, thereby sparing more people than it takes out of existence.
I haven't pondered this before.
This is a major ethical question in designing the software that autonomous vehicles run on, because they're based on probability. I mean, they make decisions based on risk probability and things like that. So if a car, as Jason says, an autonomous car suddenly detects a potential where it's seconds away from ploughing into 5 school children that have run out onto a road, it'll do a very quick calculation. What's the best case outcome in a bad situation? Best case outcome is steer the car and the occupant into a wall, thereby saving the children.
I think you might have set back the progress of this by about 35 years.
Anyone that wants to have an autonomous car or be driven in one needs to understand that the car understands their life to be less valuable than they themselves understand it to be.
And you know, we react against this and think, oh my God, I'm placing my life in the hands of a machine. But many aircraft now can land themselves without pilots, right? They're quite capable of landing themselves, and we're quite comfortable sitting on these aircraft. So these technologies are deploying right now.
Yeah. Jason Byrne, Associate Professor, and Dr. Tony Matthews, Urban Planners with the School of Environment at Griffith University. Join me for Urban Squeeze, same time each week. I mentioned earlier on in the program, it's not all about driverless cars, though. Different modes of transport, different ways of transporting stuff. I mean, trucks at the moment, freight goods here, there and everywhere, but you might look up in the sky in a few years to come, possibly, and it could be being carried by some sort of large drone object, some sort of remote-controlled device. Talk us through some of the ideas being thrown about.
Right, so one of our biggest challenges at the moment is that energy generation and transport produce most of the carbon emissions that we have in Australia and indeed in many other countries in the world. If we can start to tackle that, we begin to see some real wins. Shipping is incredibly polluting, right, Tony?
Yeah, and this is one that people don't tend to think about that, but pretty much everything that you buy or consume has been shipped from somewhere. We don't tend to air freight a lot of things anymore because it's too expensive, so what we do is we ship things, and with the standardization of shipping container sizes, that allowed for the automation of ports and a whole new fleet of freight ships to be built. So the vast majority of products that are produced, manufactured and consumed are shipped around the world. Now, ships generally run on diesel, which is incredibly polluting, and they burn an awful lot of it. So international shipping of goods and cargo is a massive contributor to global greenhouse gas emissions, and so that's definitely a pinch point where some improvement can be found.
Right. And once you get to port, then that material has to be unloaded, and usually it's unloaded onto trucks rather than trains, and then those trucks disperse it around the countryside, again emitting a lot of emissions, right?
Yeah.
Including particulates that can get deep into the lung, cause asthma, these kinds of issues. So one of the kind of thoughts that sounds a little bit science fiction again, that's happening right now, they've been trialling them in the United States, Lockheed has them, and in the UK are airships, right? Returning to Zeppelins.
Way.
Yeah. And these new generation of airships are designed in such a way that compressors can take the gas that's inside the balloon and compress it, deflate it, so the airship becomes heavier than air, and it can then just be parked in a hangar and the containers unloaded and distributed. So you presumably wouldn't have to go to a port, although it would make a lot of sense to go to a port because the infrastructure is already there, but you could take it straight to Coles, hover above and unload the material and then move on. And they're faster than ships, they produce less emissions, and they enable you to get into different places.
And they're not vulnerable to piracy.
Well, yet. Perhaps that's another thing. Maybe that's where drones come into the conversation.
Yes, so drones are another one that Tony and I were talking about, and they could operate autonomously as well. They could be presumably hooked up to the airship, and then they would take the material and distribute it. Australia Post is already looking at potential delivery of mail by drone. Amazon have drone delivery that they've successfully trialled. Domino's Pizza is now looking into using drones to deliver pizza in the United States. But we were talking about maybe hacking, right, and some of the issues that come with that too, Tony.
Oh, well, this is a big problem, and it's a big problem for any emerging transport technology, not least drones and autonomous vehicles, is the potential for them to be hacked and used nefariously. Now, you can imagine that if you've got a drone carrying, say, not even a large cargo, maybe 100 or 200 kilos, if that's hacked by somebody who decides to fly it into a populated area or a building or something like that, that's a major public emergency. Likewise, if you're sitting in an autonomous vehicle and somebody hacks your computer system, locks the door and decides to drive you down the highway at 200 k's an hour, there's not going to be a great deal you can do about it. And these are real risks. And as we continue to automate not just our vehicles but our transport systems, we continue to open ourselves up to these vulnerabilities, which are sometimes not discovered until they occur.
Yeah, exactly. Which is why these discussions are kind of relevant, I guess. Get the ideas out there. Spitballing on Urban Squeeze this afternoon. So we've got Zeppelins, we've got driverless cars, we've got drones delivering pizza. Any other little bright ideas, gents?
Driverless trains. They're already being considered for Sydney at the moment as it rolls out its new railway system. It certainly looks attractive to a government agency who's thinking about costs. If you take drivers out of the vehicles, you're saving those kind of salaries. Again, vulnerable to hacking.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, we've seen. I mean, we do have autonomous transport technologies in some countries that are used, but generally they're for things like monorails, which have dedicated tracks that they sort of can't deviate from. So I remember getting on a monorail in Tokyo, for example, that didn't have a driver, so you could sit right up at the front where the driver would ordinarily be. But the thing about that was it just basically went in a loop, and it didn't meet traffic, so it wasn't likely to cause much problem to anybody unless it came off the rails. But if you mix these autonomous vehicles with regular road traffic, then you have to account for the decisions the vehicle itself makes, but you also have to try and give the vehicle sufficient processing capability to adjust for the bad behaviour and driving and transport options that people themselves take, like running out in front of it or whatever. So.
And then you asked about other things that we might be looking to. High-speed rail has become a big issue in Australia. We're talking about potentially starting to acquire easements for high-speed rail. China has an amazing high-speed rail that can already get up to 350, 400 k's an hour. They've been trialling a new generation of trains in Europe that can get to just shy of 600 kilometres an hour, so that's competitive with jet transport. And you mentioned an African country.
Do we have the volume of population, though,
well, that's a good question.
To make this sort of thing genuinely achievable?
Well, we could spend a whole episode on that.
We probably could, yeah.
Do you want to take the answer on this one?
Well, there's been a whole bunch of feasibility studies undertaken into high-speed rail along the eastern seaboard of Australia, because the bulk of the country's population is along the eastern seaboard here.
Again, this is one of those side issues that always comes up when discussion about the feasibility of M1 funding is discussed and who pays for what and that kind of thing. Well, there's always someone who'll call in and say, why don't they just build a train, a proper high-speed train line that links Brisbane to the Gold Coast?
Because you can move more people, you can move them faster, especially when we're talking at those kind of speeds. It's Gold Coast to Brisbane in between 15 and 20 minutes.
But do we have the volume of population to make it a financially feasible?
Well, when we're looking into Australia's population growth, we talked about a couple of episodes back, we may be heading towards an Australia of 35 or 50 million. If that's the case, we definitely will have the population. If we continue to focus on density like we're doing it on the Gold Coast at the moment, then these technologies do become feasible. Not yet, but you can see a future where those technologies would become feasible.
Oh, for sure. One issue that we really have to consider with the high-speed rail, though, is that in order to achieve high speeds, you can't be stopping very often. So if there was a high-speed rail, for example, that went from Brisbane to Gold Coast and presumably beyond, it would only stop once, somewhere on Gold Coast.
Yeah.
And then you have to deal with passengers getting out and needing to go all over the coast. So it might stop in Southport, but your business for the day might be here in Mermaid.
Or at the airport.
Or at the airport. You see, so in order to achieve the kind of speed, or in order to achieve the types of speed that characterize high-speed rail, the train itself needs to be running without interruption for a period of time. So you can't have stops regularly. You just have you have major stops, and then you have to provide other infrastructure to take people to and from those stops around the city that they're visiting or returning to, in order for them to be able to do whatever it is that they're there to do.
And we could do that. We've seen that in Hong Kong, for example. It has the density. It's got a fantastic metro network. You come out of the metro station and there waiting for you is a coaster bus, right? And that presumably could be an autonomous electric coaster bus in the future with solar panels on the roof that charges when it gets to the stop using an induction charge. We've seen those technologies too, which enables you to then move around the city effectively on public transport and quite quickly. But that you need really good effective planning, and you need modal shift, and you need behaviour change for people to be okay with that.
It's mind-blowing where you take these things, gentlemen. Thank you so much for coming in again. Always good to see you.
Pleasure.
Dr. Tony Matthews, Associate Professor Jason Byrne, both from the School of Environment at Griffith University.